A lot of people that go bankrupt, and the reason they go bankrupt, they get excessive medical bills. If you spend a month at one of the major hospitals, the medical bills are going to be $1 million. If you don't have insurance, in the hospital starts to put a claim against you for the $1 million, you can, the only possible thing you can probably do is go bankrupt, because very few people could pay the $1 million. I guess if you could pay the $1 million, you probably would have paid it for insurance.
Right, exactly, Tom. And in terms of what bankruptcy will discharge, as you said before, medical bills is one thing it could help with. If you have high credit card bills, a bankruptcy could help with that. Or, as you alluded to earlier, an attorney or yourself could talk to the credit card companies yourself and try to negotiate paying off for 20 cents on the dollar, 30 cents on the dollar, whatever it is. Some of the things that cannot be discharged in a bankruptcy will be things like child support, alimony payments. If you have some certain types of court judgments against you that you have to pay, cannot be discharged. One very important one is student loans. Student loans, unless you can show undue hardship, it's very hard to show that. You cannot discharge student loans through a bankruptcy.
I know what would happen is, if they could discharge student loans in bankruptcy, every kid when he graduated from college, the first thing he'd do is walk to the bankruptcy court and say, here I am. So consequently, you can't do that. But one of the big things you can't discharge in bankruptcy is federal taxes. You know, the law was made by the government. You got to look at this like the government's like the king. Okay, and the king makes a law and says, yeah, we'll forgive all the debts. But then the king says, we're not going to forgive the debt that you owe us, the king. So you still owe your taxes. But what you do is, if you owe a lot of taxes and you go bankrupt, you can get a hearing, or you can get a meeting with the IRS. You can try to do what they call an offer in compromise. You can show the IRS all the money you have, all the assets you have, and you may be able to work out a deal with the IRS. Because what you don't want to do with the IRS is bury your head in the sand, because they'll hit you with interest and penalties, and by the time they finish, there'll be the number of zeros that you owe them will be unbelievable. So consequently, if you owe money to the IRS, you want to go see a tax attorney or have your bankruptcy attorney assist you, and work out some kind of offer and compromise with the IRS. And when you're going through life, and if you have a choice, who do I pay this month? Do I pay my income taxes, or do I pay my light bill? Folks, pay your income taxes. That's the one you have to pay.
Yep, taxes are an important one. You always want to pay your taxes. You don't want to get in tax trouble. If you need to, you can see attorneys specialize in tax about that. But yeah, as you said before, bankruptcy will not discharge certain tax things. But if you're in trouble, if you're having trouble paying all your debts, whatever they may be, it's a good idea to talk to an attorney and figure out if bankruptcy is right for you, just because an attorney who's done a number of bankruptcies would know and would have a good idea as to your best next steps, so you can get that fresh
Now,
start.
Steve, I have a question for you. Let's say we have a husband and a wife, all right? And the wife owes all kinds of money. She went credit card crazy. She owes everybody in the world, okay? But the husband, he's the old-fashioned guy. He doesn't charge anything. He pays cash for everything. Do they have to go a joint bankruptcy, or can she go bankrupt all by herself?
Well, if the debts are joint, then you'd have to file a joint bankruptcy to take care of the joint debts.
But what if it was just her debts?
Right. If it was just her debts, then she could just file bankruptcy herself, and just take care of it that way if you had that situation. And that does remind me of another interesting situation. As you know, in the Commonwealth, we have same-sex marriages, but the federal government does not recognize same-sex marriages. So a same-sex couple cannot file jointly because bankruptcy is a federal relief.
That's interesting, but I would imagine in the very near future they'll probably be changing that by statute. So when you go bankrupt, you're going to have a hearing, and then after the hearing, if nobody objects, then eventually you're going to get a discharge in bankruptcy. I know if you want to buy a house, it's usually on your credit report around 7 or 8 years for a bankrupt that you went bankrupt. But the advice we give people that once they go through bankruptcy, go to a bank, and the smaller banks in the South Shore I know have this. They'll have debit cards. They'll give you a card, and you can put money in the bank, and you can say, look at it, here's $1,000. I want a credit card, and then they'll let you charge up to the $1,000, and you can pay your bills with that card. It's a cash card. It's going back and forth, and then eventually you're going to get more credit cards because a lot of credit card companies will solicit people that went bankrupt to give them credit cards. Now that doesn't seem right, but the reason for it is once somebody goes bankrupt, usually they're in the best credit position of their life because at that point they owe nobody. And so consequently, if they have a stream of income, they become a good payer. And I believe there's a law that says you can't go back. The only time you can go bankrupt is like once every 6 years or whatever. I don't believe you can't.
7 years.
7 years. You can't go bankrupt any closer to that. So usually people that just go bankrupt, they keep up their credit pretty good. And so you can build your credit up so it doesn't take 7 years for you to buy a house or whatever. If you can show that you're paying your electric bill, you're paying your phone bill, you're paying your oil bill, you're paying your credit card, no matter what it is, a couple years after bankruptcy goes by, somebody will give you a mortgage if you want to buy a house.
Right, Tom. As you said, it's a fresh start. I mean, that's the best way to describe it. Bankruptcy gives you a fresh start on life to do all sorts of things that you maybe couldn't do before when you were constrained by all the debt you had. So
Now,
that's one of
Steve, what's the
benefits.
filing fee in a bankruptcy? Do you know?
Filing fee in a Chapter 7 is going to be, they just raised it by $10. So it's $309 is the filing fee in the Chapter 7.
Now, is there
And
any
it-
limitation on what you can charge for attorney's fees for like a Chapter 7 bankruptcy? Is it all over the place, or is there a
I
set
think
fee?
you need to have a reasonable amount. I mean, they'll differ depending on what attorney you talk to.
Okay, so what happens though, but I believe the trustee in bankruptcy will look at your fee, and if they think it's excessive, they won't allow it.
Right. No excessive fees.
You
Yeah,
can
that
only
was
charge, so
reasonable.
the most bankruptcy lawyers are charging a moderate fee for their services because they have to be approved by the bankruptcy trustee. And if the bankruptcy is very complex, then they have a right to charge more money. And I'll give you an idea of a complex bankruptcy. If somebody owns a piece of property in Florida and one in Maine and one in Arizona or whatever, then all of a sudden it becomes a much more complex bankruptcy than the person who just owns a single family house in the South Shore. And that's the one asset they have. If they have a lot of assets, then the trustee is put to a lot of work, but so isn't the attorney because they have to check the laws in the different states. They have to check how much equity's in the property, and it's a lot of work.
Right, and the Chapter 13 filing fee is a little lower. It's around $279, and sometimes you can get those fees waived. If you're below the federal poverty guidelines or around 150% of the federal poverty guidelines, then you can apply to actually get those filing fees waived. And then many times you'll get that waived. And that's a good, it's $300 less that you'll have to pay. So that's a pretty good deal.
Okay, now the other thing, I want to talk about Chapter 13 a little bit. In Chapter 13, you have to make up a plan. And what it is they take all the money that you owe, then they take how much money you make and how much disposable income you have after you have to pay your taxes, and then maybe even after you have to pay some necessary charges. And then they look at how much you have a disposable income, and then they take that money and distribute it over several years and say, okay, this is the Chapter 13 plan. We're going to take this money and we're going to pay so much every month, and it's going to go to a pool that's going to pay certain creditors. And it's all worked out with formulas. So can you add anything more to that on the Chapter 13, Steve?
Well, that's pretty much how Chapter 13 works. The repayment will be scheduled over 3 to 5 years. And as you said before, the court's just going to find out how much income you have that's discretionary income. And it's going to take that amount and say, okay, you have to apply that. You have to pay that to the court. That's going to be in your payment plan. So they won't approve your plan unless it includes all your discretionary income. And it'll be over 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and it'll stop any mortgage, any foreclosure on your house, so you get to keep that, and then you'll basically pay off a portion of your debts, and then debts will be discharged at the end of that period.
Okay, I want to caution the listeners that bankruptcy is serious business. Once you do it, it's on your record. It's on your record for a long time. In fact, it's really on your record your whole life, even though they don't keep it on the credit report the whole life. But if you ever have to fill out an application that says, well, have I ever gone bankrupt? If I went bankrupt 30 years ago, I'd still have to put down the years. I went bankrupt 30 years ago. So it's a serious thing. So what you do, if you find yourself in debt, analyze the debt. Say, how can I pay off this debt? What can I do? Can I work a second job? Can I sell some property? Can I get a commission income? Can I work in some trade where I can make a commission, so maybe I can make enough money to make take a big swipe off of what I owe? And then if it looks like you can't do that, if it looks like you can't work and pay it off, and you can't get some kind of commission and pay it off, then you look at it and say, well, how can this be paid off? And if you just feel that you can't pay it off any way at all, then you have to talk to the creditors and say, look, I got myself in this terrible situation. I owe a lot more money than I can ever pay. What can you do to help me? Can I pay no interest? Can I pay half the principal? Can I do something? And most creditors want to get paid back something. They do not want you to go bankrupt. So most of them will work with you. And if they will work with you, then congratulations, you are way ahead of being going bankrupt. But if they won't work with you and you're in debt over your head and you can't get out of it, maybe you need a fresh start. Maybe you need the broken table. Maybe you need bankruptcy.
Right, exactly, Tom. You have to sit down and look at everything, all your income coming in, everything you're paying, and maybe you can reduce some of your payments. Maybe you don't have to pay for as much as you're paying for cable or for a cell phone. I don't know. You can reduce your auto payments. But if there are certain debts that are just too much, then that might be a time to look at bankruptcy as an option.
But I also, if somebody did go bankrupt, really think about every debt that you owe. Don't go to the attorney and give them 7 or 8 debts when you have 15, okay? If you're going to have a clean start, a fresh start, get a fresh start. That's the real advice I can give people. It's just get it, do it, and then you want to, pay as much as you can pay. People, you should pay back. The other thing that happens in bankruptcy, and I've had cases like this, Steve, years ago I did some bankruptcy cases, that if somebody sells you something, let's say you buy a refrigerator from Sears and Roebuck. Sears and Roebuck has a right to go to that bankruptcy hearing and say, look, this fellow used his credit card to buy that refrigerator. We want that refrigerator back. And they can come to your house and have you and pick up your refrigerator. But the other thing that they do is they will allow you to reestablish the debt. They'll say, look, okay, we know you're bankrupt, but we'll still let you have this refrigerator. We'll give you an easier payment plan, and we won't take it from you if you sign this document that says that this debt is reestablished after the bankruptcy. So I've seen that happen. The major company I see that used to do it was Sears. I don't even know if they still do it, but it was something that they were entitled to it. They would sell, somebody would buy a tractor lawnmower or a big freezer or something, and all of a sudden they go bankrupt. And Sears says, well, why should they have the use of our merchandise if we're not going to get paid?
Right, Tom. After you file a bankruptcy petition, you have the Section 327 meeting, or 527, which is what you're talking about, which is when Sears appears. Because any creditor has a right to appear at that meeting, and most of them don't, but some may choose to appear, some of your creditors. And as you said, Sears can appear, and then you have to make a decision as to whether you want to reaffirm the debt and sign something and say, okay, I'm going to pay it back, I'm going to pay this much, or you can surrender the item and give it back. You have to make a decision about that. Most of the time you don't see creditors at this meeting, but sometimes you do. After the meeting is when another 30 days or so will pass, and then the court will grant your petition, and your debts will be discharged. That's the process.
There's another type of bankruptcy that is for mostly businesses and larger corporations. There'll be a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and what that is, it's a corporate reorganization, or it's a reorganization bankruptcy. And once in a while, you see this done a lot with the large department stores or the big chain stores. And what they do, this type of bankruptcy allows the company to analyze all the leases they have. And if they have some leases that they're losing money, let's say somebody opens a big supermarket in somewhere, and all of a sudden they find out that they're not making the business and it's not working. Let's say they have a dozen supermarkets and they got 3 of them that are killing them. They're not working. Well, then they can go to a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They have a reorganization. At the reorganization, the courts will allow them to get out of certain leases. But what happens is the owners of the company end up losing the equity they have in the company. So that's serious business, but occasionally you see that with the large retailers.